Defendant not guilty or guilty? So say you, Mr. Foreman? So say you all?
We waited for this, and justice is finally served.
It was a fantastic team, but we needed them all to defeat this.
Karen, what is life going to be like for you now? How do you feel?
What's next for Karen Reed? It remains a question, but this morning we have new reaction to her shocking retrial verdict as jurors are now speaking out. And now that we finally have a verdict in this case, how should we feel about the former lead investigator Michael Proctor now? Our legal experts discussed what's trending in true crime. And if you believe Karen Reed, no one has fought harder for justice for John O'Keefe than she has. But what does that justice look like now after her not guilty verdicts? Plus, there are new developments in the case of Sandra Birchmore as DNA clears the former police officer accused in her death of being her unborn child's father. It's all next right here on Opening Statements. Good morning and welcome to Opening Statements. I'm Julia Janae, filling in for Julie Grant. Thanks so much for being with us and following along as we get you started for a day of trial coverage here on Court TV. Just like in an actual trial with the Opening Statements, we are here to get you ready for everything that's ahead. Let's first take a look at what's up on our daily docket.
Because you regret a lot of the choices that you made in your 3.5 years of a relationship with him, right?
I would say that I resent him for leading me into the lifestyle that he led me to.
And you chose to participate in that lifestyle for many years, right?
I would say that my choices were made under a lot of emotional pressure due to my relationship.
Starting back up again today, testimony is set to resume in Diddy's federal sex trafficking trial at 9 a.m. Eastern. We will monitor any developments throughout the day as we expect prosecutors to rest very soon. Also at 9 a.m., Jamel Demons, also known as rapper YNW Melly, is set to be back in court for a motions hearing. He's accused of fatally shooting 2 of his close friends. And at 10 a.m., Austin Cronister is due in court for a motions hearing in Wisconsin. He's accused of human trafficking and sexual assault for allegedly holding 2 women captive as sex slaves. But we begin this hour with the aftermath of this week's Karen Reed verdict, because we are now hearing from 2 jurors who are speaking out. The jury decided to find Reed not guilty of second-degree murder and manslaughter and leaving the scene. This all happened on Wednesday, and it remains a fiery debate as to what these jurors were deliberating about. What were they stuck on? Now, juror number 4 and juror number 11 are speaking out to different outlets, and they're talking about this panel's verdict. Juror number 4, who goes by the name of Jason, told TMZ why acquitting Karen Reed seemed like the logical choice. Take a listen.
I think for the jurors, there's a mix of some people think that she was definitely innocent, and the other people, there was a lot of reasonable doubt, at least to where we didn't want to convict her. I can only speak for myself. I think that she was innocent. It's hard to tell exactly what people think deep down. There was a lot of things thrown at us, evidence. So it's hard to tell.
This juror named Jason said that they didn't take a straw poll at the very beginning, that they just really wanted to get into the evidence and see what everything said and where everyone stood. So let's bring in our guests to talk about this. Here to discuss, we have retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffendorfer, criminal defense attorneys and former prosecutors Joe Tamburino and David Bruno with us here as well. Thank you all for being on. Jennifer, let me start with you. Our first time hearing from a juror in this case. What's standing out to you about how they reached their decision of not guilty and what they struggled with in terms of the prosecutor's case?
Well, there were 2 facts, if you will, that each of them said that were just unbelievable to me. Juror 4 said that he didn't believe the tail light was even broken. And juror number 11 said she didn't believe that Karen Reed was even at the location at the time of the death. She said she was just there to drop him off. So it was clear to me that somehow the evidence that was in evidence just went over their heads or they didn't pay attention to it. It also seemed that it was very probable they did not consider her statements, which, remember, was one of the questions that came in.
Yeah, and her statements were something that we all thought were going to weigh heavily in terms of perhaps a guilty verdict, not a not guilty verdict. Let's take a listen to another clip from Jason.
I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened to John. Really, I was only presented a limited scope of what happened at the night, and I could only base my opinion off of the evidence that was shown in the courtroom. So I don't really know if there was a cover-up or not. I know that's the big conspiracy about it, but I don't really know. All I know is that there was a lot of holes in the investigation.
Joe Tamburino, I'm not hearing, didn't hear in this interview with this juror any mention of those fragments of tail light that we thought would be very strong for them on John O'Keefe's body. It seemed that that was not compelling for these jurors.
Well, good morning. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'm going to agree with Jennifer. I mean, he was only presented with just one piece of evidence or whatever he said, limited evidence. What are you talking about? There was so much evidence presented in this case, weeks and weeks and weeks of evidence. But I just chalk this up to two things. Number one, what a powerful media campaign by Karen Reed and her supporters. And number two, a bad decision by Judge Cannoni to allow Michael Proctor's text to come into evidence. They were clearly hearsay. She said, well, it goes to bias. Bias is not an exception to the hearsay rule. I don't know how she allowed that in, because what the defense was able to do with that is to have Michael Proctor in that courtroom, even though he never testified. It was a terrible ruling by the judge.
Well, we're going to talk a lot more about Michael Proctor, but David Bruno, back to these jurors. What is this revealing to you in terms of the reasons that they could not reach a conviction and decided an acquittal is fair? Because I'm also hearing the jurors, and we'll talk about juror number 11, but juror number 4 didn't just say there was reasonable doubt. He said Karen Reed is innocent.
Yeah, pretty fascinating. You know, juror number 4 said that there were some that were on innocent and the rest were on they didn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. You know, another thing that jumped out to me on juror number 4's statements is the lack of search of the house and the holes in the investigation. And he believed that there wasn't a collision with the motor vehicle, which was the crux of the defense's case. And the reason that he stated was the video of the vehicle that they had when it was brought into custody, that it was showing an illuminated light, and ultimately the light was completely destroyed. So look, I mean, this is proof beyond a reasonable doubt, highest burden, obviously, and it seems like they focused on the collision, lack of investigation. There were a couple things. But again, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Next step is going to be that civil case, and I think it's going to come a little bit different in the civil case because of the lower standard.
Let's take a look at the other juror that we are seeing as speaking out, juror number 11. Jessica Machado on Substack said she spoke and had 10 questions for this juror. Her name, according to this interview, is Paula Prado. And she said, this is the juror speaking, to be completely honest, when she was asked about how they came to the decision of not guilty, and did you think that Karen Reed killed John O'Keefe, she said, to be completely honest, on the first day of trial, as I observed Karen's demeanor in court, I was very suspicious. It felt like she was hiding something. Her confidence gave off an impression of arrogance. But over time, I came to understand that I was looking at a woman who had already lost so much. The fact that she was able to remain calm, composed, and actively involved in her own defense became something I admired. Jennifer Koffendorfer, we spent a lot of time talking about how involved she was in her defense. And sometimes that can be off-putting to jurors, but clearly here, at least this juror, felt that that showed that she was confident in her case.
Yeah, you know, you never know what a juror is going to perceive when they see Karen Reed in this trial and any defendant. for the angles we could see. And remember, they have a very limited angle of what they can see. And then they also can't see her facial expressions and those outbursts that she would have when the jury wasn't seated. So she had a limited view. She made her decisions based on that, in part, it would seem. But, personally, I couldn't disagree more. I thought in trial, she showed a very negative side, an unemotional side, a side that showed a coldness to the murder and to John O'Keefe's death.
Another thing I found interesting about juror number 11, something that I didn't know, is that she said that when she was going to deal with being on this jury for so long, the big issue was that she had 4 small kids. And she said that her dad came in from Brazil to help take care of them. And she said it helped her to relive what her life was like before she had kids when she was an attorney. But she said she wants to now learn more about American law, suggesting it seems that she was an attorney elsewhere. But David Bruno didn't know that someone with a legal background like that would be on this jury. I also want to show you something that was put in this Jessica's Substack of this interview, where she was asked about if she felt the judge favored either side at trial. And here was her response. She said, "I wouldn't say favored, but especially during the defense's case, I noticed a lot more of the judge saying, 'I'll allow it,' right after objections from the defense, but that she didn't feel the same way when the Commonwealth was doing that." Basically, she felt that they couldn't even get through Dr. Marie Russell, the dog bite expert's testimony, because there were so many objections from the Commonwealth. They didn't like that. Is that sometimes a strategy?
Oh, it's critical. I often say that you want to be a credible source in the courtroom, both for the fact finder and the jury when there's a jury. Making objections is important, and standing up and making them with conviction, stating legal basis, and also, I guess when the jury sees that they're being sustained and they're on the right side of the law, it brings credibility to the defense. And I think it's an excellent point of advocacy for lawyers looking at taking lessons from this case.
Joe Tamburino, what did you think about juror number 11 and what she had to reveal?
Well, the first thing about that is this whole thing with the legal background and then, not disclosing that. I mean, that's a major thing.
I don't know that she didn't disclose it. I don't know that she didn't disclose it, but I didn't know about it, but I didn't sit through jury selection. It could have been on a questionnaire somewhere.
Okay. Then fair enough, because if she did disclose it, that's fine. If she didn't, that's an issue. But, the whole thing with making an objections is, and I agree with David, you have to make them in the right area. You have to make them intelligently. You have to state a basis for it. And yes, it does give a signal when you're getting your objections sustained, which means the judge is agreeing with them. And many times judges will tell a jury that. They will say, look, objections are not evidence, but you're going to hear me say sustained or overruled. Sustained means I agree, and the person cannot say whatever it is. Overruled means I don't agree. So yes, the way you make objections and winning those objections, sure, the jury's going to consider that.
And we know this jury had a lot of criticism of how police, Michael Proctor, the lead investigator, did this investigation. So we're going to talk about that after the break. Everyone's coming with us. Stand by. Here's what's coming up on opening statements.
Yes, she's a babe. Weird Fall River accent, though. No ass.
Now that the verdict is in, how should we be feeling about Michael Proctor? What's next for him? Our legal experts break down the public perception of the lead investigator on Reed's case. Plus, new details in the case of Sandra Birchmore. A shocking development in connection to her unborn child came out this week, and it raises more questions. We'll talk about it soon.
Brutal murders of 4 University of Idaho students.
Oh my God, this doesn't happen here.
Detectives arrested 28-year-old Brian Kohlberger.
You could tell there was some off about him. He was stalking them. He was hunting them.
Forget about motive. We don't even have a connection.
This trial will be on Court TV.
And I pray that we have justice.
The Idaho College student murders trial. Live coverage begins this August, only on Court TV.
Now for what's trending in true crime, how people are viewing former Massachusetts State Trooper Michael Proctor, who was a central figure in the Karen Reed case. You'll remember this clip.
Yes, she's a babe. weird Fall River accent, though. No ass.
Now, we all remember it from the first trial and many other text messages that he had to talk about where he used inflammatory language about the defendant early in the investigation and seemed to really hone in on her. Michael Proctor did not testify at Reed's retrial, but his text messages came in again through another witness. Now, hours after Wednesday's not guilty verdict, ABC's 2020 aired an interview with Proctor, the first one he's done publicly since this all started, and he described how he felt about Reed during the investigation into John O'Keefe's death.
At what point did you develop such strong negative feelings about Karen Reed that you would say things like, hopefully she kills herself, or calling her the C word?
Those feelings developed as the case went on.
I mean, can you see how people might think, he was caught in this instance speaking about a suspect in this way. Maybe it's happened in other cases as well.
I 100% understand why people would think that. But when you have, a fellow police officer around my age, 2 kids of his own, it generates an emotion. And I expressed those emotions in a negative way, which I shouldn't have. I shouldn't even, been texting my friends anything. They are what they are. They don't define me as a person. They're regrettable.
So does this first interview change at all how people will view Michael Proctor in light of this acquittal of Karen Reed? Let's bring back in our guests, our criminal defense attorneys and former prosecutors, Joe Tamburino and David Bruno. Joe, did Michael Proctor single-handedly lose this case for the Commonwealth?
Well, not single-handedly, but close to it. I mean, let's face it, he was the Mark Furman of this trial. There's no doubt about it. And it's hard to separate the trial from him because of those texts. They were an abomination. He should never have done that. But the defense got extremely lucky in getting those texts in because the judge allowed those texts into trial, even though Mr. Proctor didn't testify under the bias rule, 616, Massachusetts Rule of Evidence. However, that's not an exception to hearsay. A bias rule just lets you get into evidence, non-hearsay evidence, things that might otherwise be irrelevant because you want to show bias and prejudice. I don't know how the judge got that in there and allowed that in. So the defense got very lucky because they got to bring in Michael Proctor without bringing in Michael Proctor. So yes, he was definitely poison to this case, but the defense got very lucky because Judge Cannoni made a bad ruling.
David Bruno, how do you think people are viewing Michael Proctor at this juncture, especially those who were really hoping for a conviction in this case?
Yeah, Michael Proctor should stay out of the media, honestly. I mean, he wasn't called in the second case. I mean, people will quickly forget about him, but for him coming forward. Honestly, I think that was one of the biggest mistakes in the second retrial is not calling Michael Proctor. Because what it did is it left so many questions about Proctor as the lead investigator not being called. And that is what the crux of the defense case was about, the lack of objective investigation, the lead investigator having relationships to the Alberts and the McCabe's, and certainly not being able to explain himself on the stand left a lot in that jury room that Proctor wasn't called. So I think Brennan did a great job. I think he improved over Lawley. I think he had better experts. He had experts coming in. He had the blue paint experiment about the arm. And the mistake I believe Hank Brennan made was not calling him because it just left that void in the case. And the defense was able to hammer that home that he was the lead investigator not called. And he had so many important responsibilities with the car and some of the important evidence in the case.
Yeah, Brennan did perhaps a better job, but got a worse outcome in the end from the position of the Commonwealth. Joe Tamburino, we know Michael Proctor is appealing his job release, saying that personal text messages have never been a reason for a cop to lose its job. But there's also the question that Matthew Gutman asked him about, has this happened in other cases? That's what people may wonder when they see this. What do you think may be the future for this former trooper?
I don't know about union rules in Massachusetts. I would assume he's part of the union. Most police officers are, so he might be going through what's called a grievance process through his union. However, he's kryptonite. I mean, where is he going to work in the future? He's going to have what's called Brady issues, meaning discovery issues that a prosecutor has to give defense attorneys when they're on the case. So even if he's working at some, small police department somewhere in Massachusetts, any prosecutor who has him on a case will have to divulge to the defense Brady material related to Mr. Proctor. So I think his law enforcement career is done, but, who knows? I mean, he's going through probably a grievance process.
All right, we are going to leave that there. Thank you both for your comments on that. Let's switch topics. Another trending case. R. Kelly's case. His attorney has been trying to get him released from a North Carolina prison as Kelly has claimed that his life is in danger there. Now, his attorney, Bo Brindley, filed a brief saying that prison officials recruited leaders of a white supremacist group to kill him. The court filing also claims that Kelly was given an overdose of medication that sent him to the hospital with blood clots. Kelly has since been back in solitary confinement, according to his attorney, still with these blood clots in his legs and lungs. So we are asking, is someone really trying to take his life in prison? And bringing back in our panel, I do want to read some statement that we received from the attorney for R. Kelly today, talking about this request for immediate release. They say it was denied by the judge. They were expecting that. They were going to have a hearing today, but that has been canceled. So they say they're not surprised, but they knew that technical jurisdiction would be a challenge under these circumstances. And they are going to be filing some other things in this case to try and get the conviction vacated. They have no choice but to act immediately, given the explicit evidence they say they have in terms of a threat to Robert Kelly's life. And yesterday they made an emergency visit to see him and can now confirm that this threat is ongoing and it is more serious than ever. Mr. Kelly remains again in prison with blood clots in his lungs. I mean, Joe and David, this is some really serious in terms of accusations, and we don't know what's going to happen next in this, but what are your thoughts on their approach to this and how the system will vet whether this is in fact true? David, I'll start with you.
These are extraordinary allegations. In fact, they are alleging that the prison staff conspired to kill R. Kelly and that they were recruiting inmates. And they have a declaration from the leader of the Aryan Brotherhood that says that he was approached to kill R. Kelly and that he's dying and that he wanted to oust this corruption throughout the prison. So extraordinary allegations. But you know what the remedy is for something like that? Transport. Getting him to a facility that is safe. And certainly it's not a reason to be released to house arrest for someone that has been convicted in a number of jurisdictions. It's not just one, it's multiple jurisdictions of conviction with lengthy prison sentences. So certainly I could see the advocacy and bringing forth these types of accusations and request for relief to get him out. But I believe it's either solitary confinement in that facility or a transport to another facility, not released to his house.
Yeah, he's been in several facilities at this point. He's been in New York, in Chicago, in now North Carolina, where he is. Joe Tamburino, they're making that motion today to vacate his convictions in Chicago based on what they're saying is newly discovered evidence. What do you think the odds are that they will get a favorable response from a judge?
Zero. I mean, that's just not going to happen. And the situation, and I agree with David, this is just, fantastical. I've never heard anything like that the Bureau of Prisons, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, is conspiring to kill an inmate. And, I mean, let's face it, I'm sure David's had a number of clients who are in prison. I have had that. Do fights go on in prison? Absolutely. And, I just have a little bit of a hard time believing that the head of the white Aryan Brotherhood of some prison would simply admit to a defense that, yes, he was part of a conspiracy to basically drug this person, Mr. Kelly, rather than there's an actual fight and a physical confrontation. But, No, he's not going anywhere except solitary confinement, and his chances of, succeeding in court at the motion are 0.
They say they've got these statements on record. I don't know if that's an affidavit or a deposition. Probably not a deposition at this point, but do you think that's what's ahead? Do they need to get permission from the judge in order to get those statements on the record, Joe?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's different types of statements. Okay, so, and we don't know what type of statement this is. This could be that one inmate says, I heard this other person say this or that. Sure, that's a statement. It could be some type of oral statement that the person said on the phone or something like that. Could be a written statement, could be a sworn statement. The best type would be is if there was a deposition. Of course, we know there hasn't been, but if there really is going to be some type of litigation in the future, and if the Bureau of Prisons allows this white Aryan leader to be deposed, sure, let's see what he says. But until that time, there's not much to go on.
All right, we will continue to follow the developments in that case. Joe and David, stick around. We have more ahead on opening statements. We do have to get to a break, but we're going to talk about on the other side a shocking development in the murder of Sandra Birchmore after a DNA test reveals new information about the father of her unborn child. We're asking, could it impact the case? Also, in our next hour, we're getting you caught up on the prep school party murder trial with pivotal testimony from the trial of Raul Valley and the deadly high school party he's connected to.
Did something occur between the St. Joe's 3 individuals that you just indicated, as well as the Shelton High School students?
Yes.
And what happened?
There was a fight.
Okay. And were you present when that fight took place?
Yes.
And when you say present, how close to the fight were you?
I was very close. I was trying to break it up.
We allege that Sandra Birchmore survived years of grooming, statutory rape, and then sexual violence, all at the hands of Matthew Farwell, who was employed throughout their relationship as an officer and then detective for the Stoughton Police Department.
Welcome back to Opening Statements. I'm Julia Janae, filling in for Julie Grant this morning. Thank you for being with us. This morning, we are giving a voice to the victims as we share a stunning development that was revealed this week in the murder of 23-year-old Sandra Birchmore. DNA tests show that the former police detective who's accused of killing her did not father her unborn child. Birchmore was found dead in her Canton, Massachusetts apartment back in 2021. Her death originally ruled a suicide, but later authorities arrested Matthew Farwell for her murder, alleging Farwell had been sexually exploiting Birchmore since she was 15 years old. She had been part of the police department's youth program, Explorer program. The theory had been that Farwell allegedly killed Birchmore because she was pregnant with his child. And at the time of the murder, Farwell was married with children of his own, with a baby on the way from his wife. It's unclear if the baby's father has been identified now that it has been shown that the child that Sandra Birchmore mothered was not belonging to Farwell, the suspect in this case. So we're wondering, does that all change anything? Joining us now to talk about this is Claudia King, a domestic violence expert and former law enforcement officer. And we also have still with us attorney Joe Tamburino. Joe, let's first talk about the legal side of this. Could this new revelation at all impact the case against Farwell?
I think it would only have a slight impact, and here's why. The issue for motive is, did Farwell believe that he was the father of the child? Did he think that obviously as soon as she gives birth, the jig is up and everything's going to come out about their relationship? Everything's going to come out about he was supposedly charged with that he's been having sex with her since she was approximately 15, 16 years of age. So it is a factor in the case, but I don't really think it's going to change the prosecution much.
Claudia, can we talk about how this even happens? It took 3 years before Farwell was even arrested. This was originally ruled a suicide. What's the process for police in extracting DNA from an unborn child?
Yeah, so it would definitely be something that would happen during the autopsy, most likely, and they would pull that DNA, whether it would be tested immediately or to be held to be tested at a later time. And then they would have compared that with Farwell's DNA to determine if he was the father. Like you, I'm not sure if they tested other people's DNA to determine who is the father or if they just determined that he is not the father. So I don't know where we're at with that side of the process.
And Claudia, just a follow-up, how do you think this impacts Farwell's case, or how police would have looked at him if they had known about the DNA early on? Does it change anything? Because we do have that surveillance video of someone who appears to be him going into her apartment around the time of what initially was thought that she took her own life, and now it has been ruled a murder.
Yeah, that video is huge. Absolutely. If that didn't exist, we might be in a different place. And, you know, I agree that this revelation about the DNA may not have a big impact because it does come down to what the defendant believed, but it gives them a little kernel of hope that maybe now they have an alternate suspect that they can point to. I don't think that's going to work, but it's probably the only Hail Mary that they have at this point.
Yeah, Joe, talking about state of mind, we know there was that text message that Sandra sent to Farwell where she was elated about having a child with him. This picture here, congrats, we are going to be parents. It's something that no doubt the defense in this case, I mean, not the defense, rather the Commonwealth in this case is going to be using, and the defense is going to have to combat when they talk about what was in his mind.
That's correct. And this is going to bring up another legal issue, because I'm sure the defense is going to object that this is completely hearsay. I mean, she is the decedent. She's not here for trial, obviously. But I'm sure what the Commonwealth is going to argue is that this is completely an effect on the listener, meaning what she said had X, Y, and Z effect on the defendant, Mr. Farwell. So, yeah, that is going to be a crucial piece of evidence, because one of the things that the prosecution is going to argue is this is what set all of the things in motion that led to her being murdered.
Claudia, this is one of those cases that has been spoken of in the same breath with Karen Reed because of the locality, because it involves police officers. Sandra Birchmore herself from the Canton area, and we have this, the Stoughton Police Department that was investigated for not just Farwell exploiting Birchmore, but potentially other issues that were similar. Talk about that part of it when it comes to this case and what that could even be like for a jury pool for Farwell.
Yeah, it's definitely going to make the jury pool aspect difficult. You know, I think it's going to be one of those cases that everybody's familiar with, and it's unfortunate that this small area has what seems to be several police officers acting in a manner that they shouldn't. But what's fortunate is that it's coming to light, so that now the Commonwealth has the opportunity to not only get justice for Sandra Birchmore, but also hopefully these departments can make changes going forward for the good of the entire area and those communities that they serve.
Claudia King, domestic violence expert, we appreciate your time. I know we have to say goodbye to you, but thank you for being on. Joe is going to be back in our 9 o'clock hour, so stand by. We do want to take this opportunity to remember Sandra Birchmore, the voice for victims that we always want to give. She was 23 years old when she was killed, pregnant with her first child. Friends say she was excited to become a mother. Now for what's tipping the scales in the search for justice for John O'Keefe. You just heard Karen Reed there say on the courthouse steps that nobody has fought harder for justice than she has. Up until 2 days ago, she was the defendant in the murder of John O'Keefe. But she's a defendant no more. A jury acquitted her, found her not guilty of second-degree homicide, manslaughter, and leaving the scene of an accident. The only thing they found her guilty of was an OUI, operating a vehicle under the influence of liquor. So what does justice for John O'Keefe mean now? Let's bring back in to discuss. We have retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffendorfer with us and criminal defense attorney David Bruno back with us. Let's talk about this because there are those, really everyone now is collectively wanting justice for John O'Keefe. Even if you were in the camp of wanting a Karen Read conviction, you wanted justice for John O'Keefe in the form of her conviction. And for those who were supporting Karen Read, they say justice for John O'Keefe means looking at other potential issues. David, do you see a situation where prosecutors or police may at all, in light of this acquittal, do something different in terms of looking at alternative theories?
Not a chance. This has been, in the press, 2 trials. This has been vetted by both the defense and the Commonwealth. And even if they were to develop a suspect, I mean, think about that suspect on trial with all of the third-party culprit and guilt arguments that Karen Read did it, right? So I can't see this going anywhere else on the criminal side. Next step, and I guess part of the justice, is going to be civil liability. Who has the deep pockets? Who's responsible? I mean, look at all this success now for Karen Read, and it's going to come with interviews and books, and she's going to have deep pockets now. So it's going to open up potential civil liability because that standard is lower. It is a preponderance of the evidence as opposed to proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And we saw it in the O.J. Simpson case as well. He was acquitted in the murders, and then he was found civilly liable, although the victims had a very difficult time collecting that because of jurisdictional issues. But I think that's the next chapter in the John O'Keefe justice saga, which is going to be civil liability, who's going to be the defendants, who's going to be responsible, and who's going to be paying.
I'm so glad you mentioned the Simpson case because there are some similarities in that regard, especially a family that is going to be going after someone with deep pockets civilly. Jennifer Coffendorfer, what do you think about how police are reacting? What do they typically do when you have an acquittal of someone? And I'm going to venture that they may be getting calls and emails and demands from constituents saying they need to now do something different because of an acquittal. But what does that really look like from the law enforcement side?
Well, first of all, I couldn't agree more with everything Mr. Bruno said. That was straight out of my thought process, too. Secondarily, those comments by Karen Read on the courthouse steps were a complete slap in the face to that family and to everyone who loved John O'Keefe. They all believe Karen Read is responsible. And finally, to your question as to, constituents calling in, who they're going to look for. Look, the evidence was there that showed that Karen Read committed this crime. Oftentimes, look at Casey Anthony, look at O.J. Simpson. Not often, but sometimes for different reasons, there's nullification in terms of the jury or great lawyering, which is what happened here. And in this case, there is no chance law enforcement is going after anyone else.
We've heard from this jury, 2 jurors now coming forward saying there was just overwhelming, unreasonable doubt. But let me get a follow-up to you, Jennifer, because I want to know what you think it's going to look like for Karen Read. You mentioned other defendants that we've seen who were acquitted, and some of them say publicly to police early on, hey, go look for the real killer now that you see a jury has found me not guilty. But what do you think will happen with Karen Read's camp, and specifically Karen Read? Do you think she's going to be campaigning to get justice for John O'Keefe, find out what exactly happened? Or is this something that she's saying now, but eventually things will die down?
I am so glad you asked that question because actually a reporter got that question in on Karen Read, asking her, who do you think did it? Who should they go after? And you know what she said? She said, I cannot answer that because it would be libel if I say who did it. So that tells you in and of itself that she doesn't even, I don't think, believe anybody else is really responsible. But I think she'll pursue a lot of book deals, as Mr. Bruno mentioned, and other, media opportunities. But at the end of the day, She's going to be found liable in a civil court, I believe, based on this preponderance of evidence, which is a much lower standard.
David, I want to talk more to you about the civil case. First, I want to listen back to a civil attorney that we did have on the program. People know him as the Johnny Depp attorney, Ben Chu, who's a friend of the show. Let's listen to what he had to say about the civil case here.
Once the criminal case has been resolved, she will not have any Fifth Amendment right not to testify as she exercised completely appropriately in this criminal trial. She won't have that luxury in the civil trial. She will effectively have to testify, and so we will hear from her, and the jury will hear from her in the civil case firsthand. It's going to be a long deposition. In fact, I would anticipate that plaintiff's counsel would ask the court to extend the period for taking a deposition. I could see this deposition taking 3 days easily.
David Bruno, that could be huge. We did not hear from Karen Reed during either of her trials. I sat through a civil trial where actress Gwyneth Paltrow was sued, and the plaintiff, the man who sued her for injuries, was able to call her in his case, something we'd never see in a civil trial, a criminal trial rather, but in a civil trial, it's fair game. Can you talk about that, what that would mean if she's able to sit down for a deposition or testify at trial?
Yeah, Ben's right. I mean, there's no more exposure to say I have a Fifth Amendment right not to testify. And, you know, it's not that she didn't speak. I mean, she didn't testify in the courtroom, but I've never seen a case where a defendant comes out of the courtroom and just gives out-of-court statements like Karen Reed did. We had interviews. We had courthouse step statements. We had all these things. And those are all going to be relevant, too, because when she is deposed, all of those prior statements could be used to question her, to impeach her, to ask for clarification. And certainly on those statements where she says, I hit him, whether or not that's a question at the end of that statement or a period is going to be front and center on prior statements once she is compelled to testify.
Yeah, that documentary that she sat for where she said, could I have clipped him? Could I have bumped him? It wouldn't get to the level and didn't get to the level of beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal case, but it could be much different in a civil trial. David, a follow-up, what do you think is next for these family members? I mean, this is an absolute tough time for them just because of what they believed and what now is the outcome. But other than the civil case, do they have any other recourse that you can think of in terms of what justice would mean for them?
You know, my first thought when I think of the family members of John O'Keefe is dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. They have been brought through, dragged through the media with 2 trials, right? And up and down, up and down. Oftentimes when I talk to my clients about trial work and the ups and downs, you just have to mentally and emotionally endure this process. And they had to do it twice. They had to do it in the press, and they did not get the result that they wanted. So ultimately, I have to really think and send my prayers out to that family, because forget about Canton's investigation, whether or not Karen Reed did it or not. They lost a family member abruptly. They never expected that. He has children, right, or at least one. I mean, there's family members that are grieving, and my prayers and thoughts go out to that family, because John O'Keefe is the victim of something, whether it was Canton police officers or Karen Reed, and that's my first thought on justice for this family.
Well said, David Bruno. Jennifer Coffendorfer and David Bruno, thank you so much for your analysis this hour. We appreciate you. We do have to get in a break. That's it for opening statements. You can watch or share this episode. Just go to courttv.com, click on the shows tab.